So, good morning. I'm Cynthia DeLorenzi, and I am the CEO of Success in the City, and I'm so glad you stopped by to see our video today. Today we're interviewing Shelley Porges, who's got a fascinating journey to success. I'm so looking forward to sharing with you and having Shelley herself tell you her story. But we first want to say thank you to Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, who is our sponsor of this entire series of interviewing amazing leaders from around the world to share their stories of how they face challenges and achieve so many incredible things in this world, and maybe inspire you to take on some new things in your life as well. So good morning, Shelley. Thank you.
Good morning.
I'm so glad you're with us today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So we met, what, 5 years ago maybe?
Something like that,
Yeah, and we were taking a Capital Speakers class.
Correct.
Which I know you are an international speaker. I'm an international speaker, but that was the most intimidating thing I ever did. Were you intimidated during the class?
I was intrigued and I was challenged. I don't know I'd say that I was intimidated, but I really enjoyed it so much, meeting wonderful people like you, and some of our other friends here in the audience also were friends from Capital Speakers.
So, and if you've never heard of Capital Speakers, it is a more than 50-year-old program that was founded in 1951, and the very first event was hosted at the White House by Eleanor Roosevelt. So if you can imagine, and it's grown to be the event now where people come together and take a speaking class. Mostly it started out being recommended for diplomats' wives and their entourage to come, and one, it's a great place to socially connect in the Washington, D.C. scene, but also hone your speaking skills. And the teacher of it is actually a professor from GW University.
That's right, and she's wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. But you only have like sometimes 2 or 3 minutes to give a speech.
Exactly.
I'm the queen of run-on sentence. I was always very challenged. So.
I think we all were challenged in that class. That was the good part about it.
So when we met, you had just moved here from California.
Right.
But it was a big deal for you.
Right.
Because you really, that's where home was going to be for you.
Exactly.
And then something happened. So tell us what happened that brought you to Washington from California.
Oh, well, thanks for asking. It's certainly not where I expected to start this conversation, but I was lucky enough to meet my second husband while I still lived in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And I have a very good friend here this morning from the Bay Area, so she knows this story very well. So I met my husband through my former business partner, who is his younger sister and now my sister-in-law. And we had a cross-country romance for 2 years, but after about a year's time, I decided that I would move to D.C. to be with him, and that I would give myself a year to make that change, because I did have kids at home still. And there was a lot of transition between, selling a house, buying a house, finding schools, and all of that. So that was the story behind my coming here, and I have never looked back. And though I loved living in the Bay Area, I lived there for 18 years and raised my kids there, it's been an amazing, amazing transition coming to Washington at that stage of my life. I was 52 years old at the time, and just extraordinary time to make a change like that.
That's why I wanted to start there with that story, because that's when I met you. You had just moved here and you were settling in, so it was all of those things. But your family's really interesting. You really would say your family came from roots of immigration,
right? Because
you were born in Israel, and your parents were not born in Israel.
No.
So how did they come to be there? Tell us a little bit about your parents' background.
Yeah, I think that like many people in this country who trace their roots back to others who came here from different parts of the world. My parents, my mother grew up in Berlin. My dad was from Czechoslovakia at the time. Now it's 2 countries, but at the time it was one. And during the Second World War, during the Nazi regime, my mother at the age of 16 ended up taking it upon herself to get to Israel to help build the Jewish state. And I don't know if you wanted me to tell you some of the stories I told you, but she had kind of an extraordinary background. She was raised in a very affluent family. My grandfather founded Deutsche Grammophon Records. He was an early entertainment mogul in Germany. He was the first silent film producer or owner of a silent film company. And so he was well known in Germany, and after Hitler took over, they nationalized all the Jewish-owned businesses, and his was one of those that got nationalized. Well, having been the scion of a family that went back for over 200 years in Germany, that was something impossible for him to accept. You can imagine that if your family came over in the Mayflower and one day you woke up and they told you you weren't American anymore, that would be a bit of a shock to you. So it wasn't quite that realm, but it was something like that. They were very assimilated Jews, and they believed themselves to be German before Jewish, and it was a shock to them to discover otherwise. But, you know, sadly, after Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in 1938, he committed suicide. He could not take it. But my grandmother decided that she would come to America because she was lucky through a fluke of history. Her family also went back for many generations in Germany. But through a fluke of history, her father, who had been a businessman, had spent a stint in the U.S., and that's when she was born. So through this fluke of history, she actually had American citizenship, even though she was, like I said, German for many generations. And so she said, okay, now nothing's holding me back. I'm going to America. And she had a sister-in-law in America. And, but at the time, as I said, my mother was 16. She was the middle child of 3. My mother had been secretly attending a Zionist youth group against her parents' wishes. And she made the decision on her own at 16, if you can imagine this, in these circumstances when there was war, there was, you know, all these things going on in Europe, to find a way to get to Palestine, to pre-Israel Palestine, to help settle and build a Jewish nation. And so that's what she did. So her mother, younger sister, and older brother went to America. And actually they landed here in D.C. And my grandmother ran a boarding house near the zoo off Connecticut Avenue.
Wow.
And so I actually have sort of roots in D.C., even though it's not roots that I was connected to, because by the time I, you know, was born and my family came back to America, or came to America, you know, my grandmother had long given that up. But
so your mother was quite a rebel. I mean, she was
very independent-minded,
yeah.
right? Very independent, and thankfully, you know, smart enough and capable enough to find her way, and was, you know, ended up with an organization called Youth Aliyah. You know, it's the youth immigration movement that saved in the early days. There was a woman named Reka Fryer who was one of the early foreseers of what was going on in Germany, and started saving young people out of Germany and bringing them to pre-Israel Palestine. Now, if any of you have been to Israel today in the modern age, and you know of Israel as a modern country, highly technologically capable, startup nation, etc., you wouldn't know that, you know, 60 plus years ago, before the state was established, 1938, it was swamplands. It was swamplands and it was desert. It was not at all, you know, there were few cities. There was Jaffa. There wasn't even Tel Aviv was not yet developed. So it's hard to imagine that it was in our lifetimes, or, you know, practically, or in at least our parents' lifetimes, that the country was so different.
So it's really interesting what brought you to America, because I think your family had intended to stay in Israel, but it was because of your health, which really surprised me, because when you think of Israel, you think of arid desert, but you developed a health problem.
Yeah, so as a kid, I had chronic asthma, and, you know, I don't know whether to attribute it, you know, in the days when my parents' generation, smoking wasn't considered a problem, and I know that my mother smoked while she was pregnant with me, so I don't know if to attribute it to that or the climate there, but a doctor told my parents that I wasn't going to really overcome it unless they got out of Israel, pretty much. And my father, being an ambitious businessman, decided that he felt that the opportunities in America were greater, and so for the combination of those reasons, we left, and we landed in this country on my 5th birthday. So every year on my birthday, it's the anniversary of our coming to this country, and I was naturalized as an American when I was 11.
So but it was easier for you to come to this country because you already had family here, right? So that made it easier. So your grandmother was here? So
my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle.
So did you come to Washington, D.C., or where did you go?
No, they were at that point in New York. Actually, my uncle was in Silver Spring. But my grandmother and my aunt and her family were in New York, and we landed in New York.
So you spent a lot of time in New York then? Were
I
you
did.
in the city?
Grew up on Long Island. Went to school at Cornell University. Both my degrees are from Cornell, undergraduate and graduate. And then started my career in New York City with American Express. So
that was really interesting. So tell us about your gig at American Express. What did you do?
You know, those were very exciting times at American Express. So unlike many of you here who have business careers and went to business school, I actually went to the Cornell Hotel, Restaurant, and Management School. And so my career, I had a master's degree in hotel and restaurant management. I was only in the 2nd master's class that the school had. They had just begun the master's program. And I was the only woman with 30 guys. And while that may seem like awesome odds, it was actually also a lot of pressure. Remember, these were the days of women's lib and that sort of thing. And it was sort of like I was carrying the whole weight for all women on my shoulders. It was like if I did well, I called some names. If I didn't do well, it was like women weren't worthy, So it actually, but then I did become buddies with a lot of the guys. It was actually, we became a very close-knit group, you can imagine. And it was a great time. But I started my career at American Express marketing the credit card to hotels, which was the segue from the hotel school. And it was a wonderful time to be at American Express because those were what I call the go-go years when American Express was growing so rapidly. It was the early days of the credit card industry. And there were lots of opportunities. I literally got promoted every year. It was a fantastic time. And I was working with a lot of really fascinating, smart people from whom I learned so much. And had plenty of great opportunities and who recognized the potential that I had.
So what do you think one of your greatest learning experiences were? Because, I mean, it's really fun to be in that cutting edge, that entrepreneurial space, that space where new ideas are beginning to take hold. What do you think some of the greatest things you learned then?
I think, I learned the value of, First of all, I learned a whole lot technically about my space, which was marketing and product management. So American Express was in those days, the Procter & Gamble of product marketing, for the financial services industry. Nobody did it better than me. So I learned a whole lot of things technically. But from a managerial point of view, I'd say that I learned the importance of having a job with responsibilities for numbers and the power that they gave you if you were capable and you could deliver on your numbers, exceed your numbers, and the fact that no matter whether you're a man or a woman, there were obviously early days of management. I'm not saying that I ever felt specifically limited by being a woman, but at the same time I was aware of situations where I felt women were being limited because they were women, not because they weren't capable. But when you had a portfolio that you could demonstrate that you were capable of delivering, nobody could argue with that. And so that was powerful. So I really recommend that to women in particular, but anybody in terms of promoting their career, especially if you're in a corporate environment.
It's so interesting because we come out of that generation where women were taking on these new leadership roles, and it was such a fascinating time. And I think it's difficult for people who are younger and a generation or two behind us to understand how unique that was then. I mean, it's kind of like being in the frontier. Yeah. I mean, women were and remember we used to wear suits? I remember I used to have a man's suit with a little bow tie. Right. And the starched shirt. So
that was our uniform.
That was your uniform. Right. And I mean, you really were very strict to that. And now I think that we've come far enough that sometimes I think we get too relaxed sometimes. I know that's one of the things I hear from a lot of people who are in corporations, that the problem is, casual Friday is looks like cocktail hour, but I still think it's nice that she's so much. So, what advice would you give to a young girl, though, who's kind of wanting to follow that career path and going into marketing today?
Well, going into marketing or any other field, I'm glad you asked that because I thought the other important lesson I learned about 5 or 6 years. So I did very well, and I was on the marketing side. And then when corporate strategy office was established, I was asked to join that office, and that was a very prestigious thing to be able to do, to work with the CEO and the chairman of the company. Did that for about 14 months. Came back to marketing.
This is at American Express.
At American Express.
So you worked with a CEO on strategy. Interesting.
Right. And then came back to marketing by choice because I really, like I said, in the corporate strategy office, it was more about politics. Although I had some extraordinary experiences, in the marketing field, it was all about getting results, and I love that. I realized.
So marketing's about results. Strategy is about politics. Explain that to me.
It wasn't as clear how to get ahead in the corporate strategy office. It was about who liked you, who you kind of, catered to, that sort of thing. And while that's always important, I mean, I think it doesn't matter what job you're in, you need to be aware of the people around you, the people above you, the people below you, and the people you work with as peers. I think it's always important to be a team player and, make sure that you're all moving together as an organization. To have pleasing individuals from a subjective point of view as opposed to from the business point of view being a key part and, almost the only driver of how you succeed was something that was, but I learned a lot. Clearly I learned a lot, but I loved, the marketing side. And so coming back to your question about what I'd recommend, when I came back to marketing, one of the things I did Well, I came back where there was the guy who headed up marketing in those days for the card marketing unit was a guy who'd known me, but who basically didn't appreciate the added value that I brought from corporate strategy. I thought I understood our business so much better and brought so much. Yeah, I knew that I'd learned a huge amount and could see opportunities now in the card business that never even occurred to me when I was sitting in the card business, because I had that global view, could bring that back. He, on the other hand, said, "Oh, well, you just missed out having 14 months of marketing experience, so you come back into a lateral position." And I thought, well, the heck with that. I'm leaving American Express, but I'm not going to leave. I want to leave at that time. I started thinking about starting my own company already. But then I thought, I don't even know if I know how to run a company. I know how to do marketing. I know how to do planning. Those are the things I've done in product development. So let me go see if I can take on a P&L, a unit within American Express that actually delivers its own profits. And there was actually only one of those that was smaller than the card business. So imagine this. So American Express was the credit card business, the travel business, and in those days we had traveler's checks. And underneath that you had, the green card, the gold card, soon to be the corporate card, and all those things. But there really weren't P&Ls, separate businesses, except this one little tiny unit of marketing, which was a direct, essentially the list rental business, which I thought was not being managed well. I thought this could be so much bigger. This could be a direct marketing adjunct. This could be bringing in merchants to promote the American Express card. I had a vision for what this group could do that was so much greater than what they were doing. And coincidentally, the position came open. And I thought, that's what I'm going to go do. I'm going to go run this P&L, and let's figure out if I can really run operations, oversee finance, and all these other pieces. Well, in the company, it was not considered a prestigious job at all. And I had always had these very, sort of prestigious jobs. And so when I raised my hand and said, I want that job coming back, everyone looked at me and said, are you kidding? Why would you want that job? Ooh, that's like this. And I'll tell you a little personal story about it, which is kind of sad, but the job was so looked down upon. So all of us were in essentially our 20s and 30s. Of course, we thought we knew everything, as 20s and 30-year-olds do today as well, with all due respect. I think we have a millennial here in the audience. I have kids who are millennials, so I say that with all due respect. But the gentleman who was running this unit before I took it over was, I believe I'm right in saying he was 48 at the time, and very sad. The guy was a workaholic, and sad to say that he was such a workaholic. He actually had a heart attack in the office, and died in the office, like in the hallway. We tried to give him, CPR. We, obviously called the ambulance or whatever. But so on top of it not being prestigious to begin with, imagine that you're now about to fill a job that somebody literally died in. It's like going into a house where there was a murder, It was obviously extremely sad and but I looked at this and I thought, gosh, I get to run a business. How cool is that? So I raised my hand and asked for the job. Everyone thought I was nuts, but I got it, And immediately I ended up working for a guy in this job who was a very lovely guy, and he, very smart, Harvard MBA, Lehigh engineer, undergrad Lehigh engineer, Harvard MBA, so you can imagine this guy was quite smart. But you know what? And when I got into the business, I said, Ken, here are my plans. Here's what I think we need to do to bring this business back. Because the business was such a small P&L that, mostly in American space, they didn't care. It was a rounding error. But it had been in a 3-year decline. And at that point, it was only contributing about $900,000 to the PS. So nobody even bothered American Express. That wasn't even material. But I thought, this could be a big deal, this business, and it's not being run properly. So I go to him and I give him my ideas, and I said, so the first thing I need to do is next week is the direct marketing conference. I need to go. All of our clients will be there. And we had, one of the reasons it was in decline, our operations were a mess, an absolute mess. And so we were losing clients right and left. We were messing up their mailings, whatever. I said, he goes, oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you. He said, our clients are going to be there, and they're really mad at us. And I said, well, yeah, I know. That's why I need to go. I need to, hear from them, and then I need to, and this will be an efficient way of doing that because they'll all be there. I said, and I need to look them in the eye and basically say to them, I'm not going to come back and ask for your business until I can promise you personally that the problems have been solved. I mean, I was well aware of the problems. And he said, oh, no, I wouldn't do that if I were you. You need to sit here and write policies and procedures is what his idea of turning the business around was. So clearly we're different. And at that moment, I suddenly thought, you know what, the first time in my life, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do what my bosses asked me. I mean, as girls, we're raised to be very obedient, to meet the expectations that people have of us, often to exceed them, but never to say, forget that. That's not the way. And I realized instantly at that moment, I know a lot more. I don't care what kind of credentials he has and and he was a super nice guy. It wasn't like anything like that. But I really believed then at that moment that I know more about this business and how to run it and how to turn around than he does. And sure enough, I was always very respectful of him, but pretty much ignored what he asked me because I didn't think that anything he asked me was relevant to actually turning the business around. And we did turn the business around, and it became an $18 million business within 2 years.
So from $900,000 a year to $18 million.
Right. We totally transformed into a direct marketing consulting firm. We had every major merchant of American Express now coming to us for marketing advice and for doing things. And the head of the merchant marketing business conservatively estimated that after 2 years of doing this, that we were that through the mailings we were doing by promoting the American Express card with these merchants in these mailings, that we were generating something like $200 million of billables on the American Express card.
That's incredible. Now, what I really like
which was
about
the
this
bigger
story,
P.S., which was really the bigger deal than the $18 million even that we were making, right, is leveraging this incredible resource called the customer list and database for the benefit of the larger company, not just for the little P&L that we were.
So I love your story, because you looked outside. You didn't say, I can follow this track. I mean, a lot of times I think we like to get in our comfort zone, and sometimes say I want to move a little bit, shift off, and take the thing that but it's always somebody who goes, wait a minute, let me look around, let me see. And sometimes there's opportunities all around us in that little corner of the business, and you jumped in and took it.
Well, and that's the bottom line, is to take the risk, to get out of your comfort zone. That's exactly the point. And as women, I think women more than men have a hard time doing it because we are all about managing our environment, managing what's comfortable, or at least doable, and what we think is possible. And because often we lack the confidence, even though our capabilities go far beyond the steps we've been taking.
That is such a great story. I'm so glad you shared that with us. So now you ended up in Toronto. Now, were you with American Express when you went to Toronto?
I was. So the story how I got to Toronto is that as head of credit card marketing for the whole business when I was 32 years old, and Canada was the largest card market outside the U.S., so that was significant, is the guy who was the head of the merchant marketing business that I just mentioned, who said that conservatively we generate $200 million. I had been working a lot with him and his group to develop this business. And so he had seen what I'd done. He became president of Canada and took me along with him, basically. That's how that happened.
So it's good to make friends. It's
Well,
good to look outside the norm.
Well, it's not only making friends. He recognized.
That's true. You demonstrate, yeah.
He recognized that the contribution that I had made in pulling together a new team around this business, in developing a new vision, a new direction for it, and then in executing on it in a way that was very successful, not only for our own business but for his unit. So when he became president of Canada, he asked me to come up and become head of marketing for Canada. And that's how that happened. So
let me ask you about the guy that you came in, that when you took over, and he said, I just want you to stay here and write policies and procedures. What happened to him? And did you have conflict as you're beginning to not follow the direction?
No, actually, because we were starting to get noticed more and more and getting more and more compliments from the rest of the company and kudos, and he was part of that. I mean, he got to, and I think I told you the story. Fast forward several years later, when I became head of marketing for Bank of America when I was 34, all of Bank of America, first for their credit card business, and within 2.5 months of that for the entire bank during a major corporate turnaround. I was trying to fill my position as head of marketing at Bank of America, which is the largest card portfolio in the U.S. And the HR, VP comes in to review the top resumes that we've gotten off of our, in those days, classified ads. Do you remember the days of classified advertising? And one of them was this guy that I used to work for at American Express. And I'm looking at his resume, and I'm realizing he's taking credit for all those things that he didn't want me to do, that turned the business around, for turning the business around on his resume.
Interesting.
And I told the HR person, I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Look at this resume. These are all the things he didn't want me to do, you know, and, but it was really interesting. She said, oh, well, do you, and so the classified ad was blind. I mean, he would not have had any idea that what he was applying to me for the job. So she says, well, do you want me to go back and, you know, tell him that? I said, no, don't tell him it's me. I said, but you know what? We're not hiring this guy.
Yeah,
I said,
interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. So, but I guess in a way he could kind of take credit for it and say he was your boss. So in a way, yes,
Yeah,
like I did
exactly.
this, I did that. You know, just that you did it, but so that was really interesting. So you left, how did you end up in California? How'd you
Well,
leave
B of
Porges?
A was headquartered in San Francisco in those days, so that was 1987, and I got recruited to, you know, be considered for the head of credit card marketing, which was a logical segue after 10 years at American Express. And this was almost 2 years into my stint in Canada, and I knew that I'd want to come back to the States eventually, even though we loved living in Toronto. It was a beautiful city. My son was born there, and you know, so a lot of happy memories. But that said, I knew that if I came back to American Express in the U.S., I'd get a sliver of one of the card businesses when I'd already been running all of the things, even though on a much smaller scale. And so when I got this opportunity to interview for this job, although I'd never been to San Francisco, so you know, everybody who was here, you know, friends of mine who were hearing San Francisco, oh my God, just go because it's San Francisco, forget about anything else. So I ended up going because I felt like it's too big an opportunity, you know, not to consider. And had my whole first day of interviews and came back and then was asked to come back for second interviews. And during the first day of interviews, I wasn't all that impressed with the people who were there, but what I was impressed with, I mean, one of the impressions I got was that there was this gentleman named Dick Rosenberg. He was the vice chair of the retail bank. He'd just been recruited from Wells Fargo, and he was a marketing genius from everybody I heard. That this is a guy who started MasterCard, and he did this, and he did that, and Wells Fargo is, you know, king in retail banking in the West Coast, and all this sort of thing. And I thought, how is it that I've been in this business and I've never even heard of this guy? And so when they called me back for second interviews, I said, okay, well, I want to talk to this Dick Rosenberg guy because he's, you know, he wasn't going to be my boss, but he was my boss's boss. And you have to understand, in those days, B of A was on its knees. They had lost they had an over $2 billion quarterly loss at the time I got recruited. In fact, when the recruiter called me, I said, Jeff, I have a really good career. Why would I want to go to Bank of America? They just lost over $2 billion when that was a lot of money. You know, these days it's not that much money, but those days that was
Sounds like a lot to me.
$2 billion quarterly
I'm
loss.
funny about money.
Yeah. But so they, at first, they said to me, oh, no, you know, he's too senior and he's too busy and this and that and, you know, whatever. I said, look, I've got to look this guy in the eye and ask him if he's going to sell the credit card business because it was one of only two profitable businesses. They had just finished selling the Charles Schwab discount brokerage business back to Mr. Schwab. The B of A used to own that business. They sold it back to Mr. Schwab because they were losing a lot of money and they were looking for, you know, assets wherever they could. So I said, I got to look this guy in the eye and ask him if, you know, he's going to sell the business. I mean, you know, you're asking me to move across the country where I don't know anybody, have my husband sell his business and so forth. I said, that's a big, you know, it's a big move. I need to do it. So I insisted. I told them I wouldn't come back unless I had an interview with Dick Rosenberg, which was the best thing I ever did. So the interview with Dick Rosenberg's story is that, so I come back, see a bunch of other people. In the afternoon, I have my scheduled interview with Dick Rosenberg, but it was the day of a very infamous B of A annual meeting. So B of A is on its knees. B of A had been around since the early days. 1906, during the San Francisco earthquake, A.P. Giannini, who was the founder of the bank, famously, after the earthquake, leveled the city, set up a desk to give out money to people needing to recover from the earthquake. So B of A was actually the first retail bank in that sense. But in these days, in 1987, B of A was on its knees and decided that they were going to stop giving dividends, and retirees from B of A depended on those dividends as their income. So it was a 4-hour annual meeting. That's not typical, 4.5 hours. So I'm sitting there cooling my heels for well over 2 hours because he's late because he's in this annual meeting, which was, you know, people shouting. I mean, I heard all about it afterwards. But to his great credit, he comes into, I'm thinking, as I'm hearing about this meeting going on, I'm thinking, that can't be good. What kind of a mood is this guy going to be in by the time he gets here and I get to talk to him? But to his great credit, despite this horrible meeting, he comes in, You know, he's got an incredible smile on his face. I have literally a 17-minute interview with him, and I'm thinking, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I go back to Toronto. I said to my husband, I'm taking the job. This guy's going to turn this bank around. And then I had no clue that what would happen in the, a few months later when I did take the job was that in the first 2.5 months of running the credit card business, I went to my boss, who was the head of the credit card business, with 3 recommendations on turning our credit card business around. Because again, our credit card business, though it was profitable and was one of the, as I said, the only 2 profitable businesses, was also in decline because we hadn't, really taken advantage of many of the trends at that time in the credit card business. And the recommendations were such and sizable enough and required investments that were large enough that we had to go to Dick to get them approved. And the first one was a recommendation that he understandably had said he would be against before we because it had come up before. And so when we, went in, he was sitting there, the body language like this, arms crossed, legs crossed. Those days we had the slide decks, you'd have that and say, oh, we're here to recommend X, and he'd already said he's against X. And I knew that, so I promised my boss, I said, look, we'll come up with a plan that'll overcome his objections to X are absolutely understandable, but, if we don't do it, here are the other implications. We've done a bunch of research. So he's sitting there going like this. He already said he's against X. I said, well, we know you've said you're against X, but here's why we think we have to do it, and here's a plan to do it that will address the issues that, are going to, will potentially come there if not specifically addressed. And by the end of that, he approved it. Wow. So that was a recommendation.
Strategy, planning, articulating against an argument. That's masterful.
Focusing on the profitability of the business, very importantly for a bank that was, on its knees and going, potentially going out of business actually. And then, so 2.5 months into my stint as head of the card business, my boss comes in, the head of the card business comes in to me, says, Shelley, sit by your phone. Dick Rosenberg is going to call you. And I'm thinking, oh shit, what have I done now? Because it's like going to the principal's office, it's the vice chair of the bank, and thinking, that can't be good. And he says, no, he's going to offer you, and he had recently fired the head of marketing. He's going to offer you the retail job. I said, don't be ridiculous. I said, I've only been here, I haven't even implemented anything. I mean, all we've done so far is recommend things. And he said, no, he's going to call you. So stay by your phone. And sure enough, a few minutes later, Dick Rosenberg calls me, please come to my office. Okay, go to his office. He offers me the chief retail marketing officer job. I'm 34 years old. And by the way, the previous 3 heads of marketing and product management at Bank of America, none of them had made it for a year. So with the body strewn before me, I get this magnificent offer of job. But classically, now ladies, please note this, do not do what I did, which is I walked into his office and basically set about to persuade him that I was the wrong person for the job. So I said, well, Dick, I said, you've seen my resume. You know that I don't have anything more than credit card experience. That was my first thing. And he said to me, well, this will tell us if you're really a great marketer or just a great credit card marketer. So he wasn't taking it. I said, well, but Dick, I said, we've got 170 products, we've got, all these different pricing, we've got, deposit side products as well as, lending side products. I mean, I've only been on the lending side. I mean, I was working hard to talk him out of it, basically. I mean, I didn't realize it then, but now when I look back on it, I think, oh my God, what was I doing? And, and he said, well, just consider this a private tutorial. That's literally what he said to me. So here's this man. He's the vice chair of a $200+ billion bank. Now it's even bigger than that. And, or 220 billion, whatever it was. And he's offering me a private tutorial as the head of marketing to cover all these products that I'd not had experience with. I mean, obviously, he was not going to take no for an answer, and obviously, that wasn't an option for me either. Given a desire to pursue a career at the bank. So,
how did you slip into that position? Did you feel you really actually were able to do it and kind of?
Well, even before talking about something really, in a way, extraordinary happened after that. When I said yes, I realized I cannot let this man down. And even though I could certainly say I was a confident person. What I didn't realize was that he had more confidence in me than I had in myself. And by making me that offer, and by so asserting that he would back me up in every way possible, by saying private tutorial essentially says, I'm here for you, kind of thing. I found myself stretching and thinking, and in ways that, I think I was very effective and successful before I had that job. But I can tell you, I saw it in myself. He taught, it was an incredible lesson in leadership. When you seek talent, to support that talent and to provide opportunities to people who themselves don't, and particularly women, who don't even understand their own capabilities. And I stretched so far and so hard. And I'm not saying I worked even harder, which I did do, because I was already working quite hard. It's not about working harder. It's about being more strategic, more thoughtful, more proactive, more whatever, and stepping up to leadership in a way that I don't know that I would have done. I was stepping up to leadership as the head of credit card, but for me that was a logical segue from what I'd already done. This was a big leap. This was a very big leap. And it was an incredible lesson in leadership. So I always thought of him as an entrepreneur at the top of this $220 billion retail bank because, I felt back, I thought, people at American Express who knew me way better than he knew me, who'd seen me perform in all kinds of circumstances with a lot of success, would never have taken this risk on me. They would have seen it as a risk, where he did it.
I think that's really remarkable, and I think it's so telling. And a lot of times it's because we say yes. Things happen in our lives because we say yes, and you said yes, and you moved out of your comfort zone, and then you flourished. So, but I want to kind of get to where we are today. So I want to kind of quickly, then you moved into an entrepreneurial
I just want to give
job.
the PS on the story is that within 18 months we had a historic corporate turnaround that was at the time the largest corporate turnaround in American corporate history that was non-government aided. So we went from being last to first in deposit gathering. We went from being number 23 to number 1 in consumer lending in the country, and that again without any government assistance. And it was historic turnaround.
That was a big PS. You're right.
Yeah.
That was a
yeah.
big PS.
You need the PS
added
on the
that.
story. Yeah,
Yeah, no,
and it was a thrilling time. And we just launched products. We launched Saturday banking, which today we take for granted that all major banks offer Saturday banking. That didn't exist in 1987. We launched the first ever credit card balance transfer program. 1987. Again, nobody. Today every card. That's the only way they do business. It didn't exist in those days. We launched a whole bunch of different initiatives that really helped the bank turn around.
That's amazing. So even in the big corporate environment, there are turnarounds possible, and there's always opportunities you maybe didn't foresee. Just fantastic lessons we've learned just from your 2 jobs we've talked about so far, which is American Express and Bank of America. That is fascinating and really very telling about the rise to success.